All right. Good morning, everyone. Or if you're listening to the replay, good afternoon or evening or whatever time it is for you. My name is Joan Jack, and this is Brave Indigenous Conversations. I've started the podcast by opening with a reading from Mickey Scott B. Jones, An Invitation to a Brave Space. Together, we will create brave space because there is no such thing as a safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars, and we have all caused wounds. In this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and love. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be, but it will be our brave space together, and we will work on it side by side. So I absolutely love that. When I was introduced to it in a nonviolent communication training that I was taking, and I just thought, oh, that just speaks to me. So this morning we have Andrea here, and I'm not going to missay your last name. So I would like you to and invite you to introduce yourself, Andrea, and then we'll visit.
So my name is ANDREA Englehart, and I'm visiting from Atlin, BC.
Nice. So tell us a bit about who you are.
Okay, so I'm a 41-year-old self-identifying Indigenous woman. I have 4 children. I had a 16-year marriage, still wonderful relationship with all that entails. And yeah, I consider myself a strong, confident woman who's ready to have a brave conversation.
So you got a hold of me, Andrea. I was really happy. And anybody out there listening, if you feel like you want to have a conversation with me, please just contact me. So you got a hold of me because you'd come across my podcast. I'm not sure how, and said you wanted to talk and share about your experience as a self-identified Indigenous woman. And I was like, yes, this is cool. So
Mhm.
talk about that a bit.
Yeah. So when I had gotten a hold of you, um, I was actually, I had said, I have Métis background. I want to know more about my family. I don't really know much about it. I've got a little bit of fear because a lot of my family members I've really been away from my whole life for various reasons, safety reasons as well. Um, and then you had said to me, so are you Métis or do you just self-identify as Métis? And that really stuck with me. And so there's no other way to describe other than the feeling of fear and being frozen in fear. And we all know that fear is like, false evidence that's appearing real. But to get your mind through that, um, it's a process, and a process that no one can have a time frame on, not even you. And so I've been really struggling with that, and I had the intention of, okay, well, I'm actually going to do it this year. I want to find out my background. I want to find my culture. I want to find my people. I want to, relive those experiences that I had as a child because I'm missing something in my life. But then when you had said, "Are you Métis or do you self-identify as Métis?" That really hit me, and so being frozen, um,
Yes.
I did nothing for 3.5 weeks. Nothing but think and ponder about that sentence, And I'm going to be honest, like when I got off the call, I was feeling so good. But then those words hit me again. And I was like, why am I like that was a positive conversation. So
Yeah.
how do I have a negative all of a sudden? Because we
Mhm.
all know if it's not positive, it's negative, right?
Mm. Yeah.
And so yeah, it took me a lot. And I think I'm still kind of working through that, and I'm still kind of 2 weeks ago, I was going to message you and say, hey, you know what? I don't think I can have this conversation because
Mhm.
I'm still kind of in the fear. But, all of the training and everything that I've had in my professional life, I'm
Mhm.
always taught to feel the fear and do it anyway. And
Yeah.
so that's what this is about. Still working through the fear and being uncomfortable, but being comfortable with that uncomfortability.
I love it. So, maybe share about, like you shared with me, some of your childhood memories. Like, tell your story. Like, you have a very interesting, such a cheap word, overused word, but you know, um, t- sh- like share with our listeners what you shared with me. And
Well, first, I have to say, yesterday I was listening to another podcast, and two sentences really struck me. And it says, "Your story matters, and your
mm,
story is being written." And
mm,
then further in the thing in the podcast, the lady goes on to say, "But your story continues to grow as God grows you, or the Spirit grows you, or whatever you believe in, right?" And so I thought that was interesting. So a little bit of background: I was born in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. I've always known that. Um, I've always known that I was a little bit different from the rest of my family. There's 8 children in my family, and I've always been the one who doesn't follow suit, the one who is outgoing, the one who speaks up, the one who, is just maybe more confident in my words. Not sure why. That's a whole nother story.
mm,
But yeah, so single mom of 8. My dad was a long haul truck driver. He just used to pretty much come home, impregnate my mom, and leave again. He was always on the road. And so I used to spend a lot of time with my dad's side of the family. Not my mom's side. We didn't know my mom's side at the time at all. She was adopted at a very young age. And so, yeah, I remember, going to powwows and back to Batosh days and, jigging on stage when I was a kid. And every Thanksgiving, Kukum would say, "Put your foot down," and she'd trace it on newspaper. And then every Christmas morning, we'd have new moccasins.
mm,
And so that was my childhood. Just sitting around with the women and beating and sewing and listening to all the guys in the backyard on their fiddles.
mm,
And so it was good, but there was also scary moments too. A lot of sexual abuse in those younger years, again from family members on my dad's side. And so I think that's where a lot of my fear comes from. And so when I was 10 years old, my mom had enough. And so she had taken one of my uncles to court. And I think this was like the third time. And I remember sitting in that courtroom. Um, and I remember my uncle bribing me with a chocolate bar to not
mm,
say anything. It was a Kit Kat bar. I even remember the kind of bar. And yeah, I remember that feeling of just yuck. I,
mm,
I don't even know any other word to describe it, but yuck.
mm,
And so I remember going home and telling my big sister. I had a big sister through like big brothers, big sisters society.
mhm,
And I remember telling my big sister, these feelings, and I know that at that time, I knew that my uncle was sexually molesting my 2 older sisters, and that's what he was in court for. But
mm,
what I did not know at that time, until I sat in that courtroom with my mom,
mm,
is all of these feelings and suppressions and just like glimpses of memories
mm,
of being sexually abused myself.
mm,
And so that was really scary for me, obviously. And I think it still is, because,
mm.
it's a form of abuse still when you continue it in your mind, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, fast forward, I had that conversation with my big sister. She went in turn, seeked out my mom. And at that point, my mom just had enough. And she also had found her biological family in Ontario. And
Mm,
so it was the perfect timing for her to literally pluck us up and move us to Southern Ontario.
mm,
Now, at that time, I'm like 9 years old. I guess I had my 10th birthday in Ontario, so almost 10. And at that time, it was a lot of chaos in my house because, of course, I was 9, but my older siblings were like 12, 15, 17. So, like, at the social prime of their life. And so there was a lot of animosity in the house of just being moved, um, because they didn't want to move their social lives and now they were forced. So that caused kind of a chain reaction. My older siblings eventually ran away. Um, and so then I was there, you know, with my mom, but also raising my younger siblings because my mom was never home. And that's a whole nother story.
Mm.
And so, yeah, it was just, at a young age, at 14, I was taking care of my two younger brothers and my younger sister. My
Mhm.
younger sister was born with two holes in her heart and one hole in her lungs. So it was a lot of back and
Mm.
forth to the hospital. And those
Mm.
hospital trips, I would often make myself pushing her in a stroller as she was hooked
Mm.
up to a heart monitor. That was going crazy.
Wow.
And so a lot of stress there. I ended up running away from home when I was 14, hitchhiked across Canada to find my dad. My dad, I knew he lived in Burnaby, what I thought Burnaby, but he did work in Surrey. And so, yeah, I eventually found my dad, moved out here, didn't talk to my mom for several years, which is a regret. Doesn't matter how bad a relationship is with your parents. I think I'll always regret that one. 2 years of not having a conversation with my mom, and she's now gone. She passed in 2006.
Mm.
But yeah, just fast forward now. I met my husband I met him when I was 16. We started dating when I was 17. We got pregnant when I was 18, and then I looked at him and said, "You're marrying me." He did not have a choice. He did not have a choice, and so. Yeah, we had two children and then we got married and then we waited 6 years for some odd reason and had two more. We have a beautiful family and yeah, I've always had multiple jobs, always just try and keep myself busy. And I think in retrospect, keeping me busy keeps my mind occupied so that I don't have to have these brave conversations.
Yes, workaholism is a great escape. I can relate to that. I just want to circle back to, we don't know the impact we're having on people unless they share it with us. We have
Mhm.
our intended impact, um, and then we have what happens for them. And I really appreciate you sharing that my words impacted you, and I also really appreciate um, you not attaching any negativity about that to me personally. That's really generous of you. The response could have been, whatever, eh? Joan's an ass
Mhm.
and whatever. But which is still a valid opinion on some days. But what I asked you was, for those people just joining us now, is, are you Indigenous, or do you self-identify as Indigenous? And so I want to say something about that first. And what you've made me think about this morning is that one of the fundamental differences between individualism and collectivism is that, from the collective point of view, my understanding of the collective point of view, I am who I am because there's a community I can point to and say, I belong there. And those are my people. And so that's what makes me who I am. Whereas in an individualistic worldview, the world is my oyster. And wherever I go, there I am. And I'm free to do whatever I feel like doing as an individual, primarily. And I mean, that's grossly oversimplified, but for the sake of our sharing,
Mhm.
that's where I was coming from when I'm asking, you know, are you Indigenous? Like, because you're searching, so I wanted to know how, because you have your childhood memories, of your cookum, and the culture and the music and all of that, and the bad stuff, and then that's you were removed from that. And I
Mhm.
can't remember if you already said what happened why there was a break in that. That's one thing.
Yeah.
And then, so that's all I wanted to share with you. That's where I was coming from with that.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. It's very easy to take offense when someone says something, But then you really have to think and go back in your own head and understand why that was offensive,
Mm,
and where that offense was coming from.
mm.
And, if it was a genuine question, like obviously there was no negativity when you had
Yeah,
asked that question, right?
yeah.
And so that really took me into my head a lot this past month.
Mhm,
And that's okay. And it's still kind of sitting in there floating, right?
mhm,
But yeah, I mean, I had that break in that side of the family. When I was in Ontario, we didn't have any contact with them. I don't think I spoke to anyone on that side of the family for probably at least 15 years.
mhm,
And by that time, I had seeked out counseling for myself when I had moved back here to BC, when I had ran away from home. I sought out counseling for myself. I
mm.
think it was probably 16, 17 at the time, and did, regular sessions and whatnot. And so I was ready to get a hold of that side of the family because there was a lot of good that came with
Mhm,
the bad. And
mhm,
so I reached out to my aunt. And I had told her what had gone on in my childhood, and she already knew, like
mhm,
so pretty much confirmed what everything. But then I was really hurt because I didn't understand, if she knew and she understood, why did she condone, you know and whether you understand it or not, you're condoning a person's behavior just by accepting it, you know
mm.
and
Enact.
yeah, and the inaction to do anything about it. And so several years went by, again, after reaching out, because I was hurt. After having that conversation, I was kind of hurt. So several years went by, and then I started having children. My older siblings already had children at the time. And so then I had my niece and nephew. They used to come stay with me every summer. I'd fly them from, or well, sometimes they truck drive, but they would come from Saskatoon or Prince Albert out to Harrison Hot Springs, and we would host them for the summer with my kids, and they loved it. And then my niece, we were sitting on the beach in Harrison Hot Springs, and my niece was 10 years old at the time. And she's like, Auntie, how come you never come to any of the family reunions? And was kind of getting, like, poking me at those things. And I was like, well, there's just some differences, and I have some fear that I got to get over, and there's people I don't want to see, and I don't want to be uncomfortable, and so I don't want to spend all that money and travel to just be uncomfortable. And so she's like, oh, well, who don't you want to see? And so I had mentioned a couple names of my previous abusers. And she had then told me that my Uncle Dennis, her great Uncle Dennis, was doing the same thing to her.
Oh my goodness.
And again, you're so frozen in fear. But
Mhm,
I think I was just angry. I was more angry than
mm,
anything. And so, first thing I did was, of course, I call my counselor, and I call my sister, and I said, and I was angry at my sister. Not only was I angry at my uncle, but I was angry at my sister, um,
mhm.
because this man had done this to her, to my other sister, to myself, and now to her daughter.
Yeah,
And so the anger came from a place of, how could you put your kids in that situation, you know? And
yeah.
so I remember phoning my sister and saying, well, sorry, I'm not sending your kids back until you get this man out of your life, period.
Mhm,
We went to the police station, we made reports. And so I ended up having them, I think, 3 or 4 months longer
mm,
than what was planned. But I really needed to make sure that there was a plan in place before I sent this child back into that environment.
hmm.
So, um, yeah, that broke a lot of trust between my sister and I. I didn't end up having the kids anymore for summers because of that. And I understand that there was a lot of hurt coming from my sister's side as well. But I
Did
mean,
she ever answer your question? Like when you said to her, like, how could you be letting this happen when he did this to you and
it was
me?
complete
And now you're
denial. It
complete
was
denial.
complete denial. It was, well, I thought he had changed. I didn't think he would. And, back then, the court system, I mean, it's still not great, But
Yeah.
this man has never been charged. He's never been charged. He's gotten off of everything. And it's interesting because, and I truly believe if I would have been there with my niece in Saskatchewan, and that's, again, a regret that I have, if I would have been there, um, and I think that's kind of the fear I have going forward, is do I want to reopen this can of worms, right?
Mm-hmm.
But, there was no one there to stand up for her. And so what I have regular communication with my niece. And so, yeah, at that time, the family came together out there and said, okay, well, family gatherings, he's not going to be banned, but, you're just going to have to work through your emotion and you guys are basically going to both be here because we're not uninviting him. So it's still a lot of cover up bullshit on that side of the family. Still a lot of condoning, still a lot of denial. My other sister's the same way. She'll put her kids in that situation with that man, and I just don't get it. So I think a lot of my fear is literally stemming from that. And
Mm.
so fast forward, my niece is now 23, 24 years old.
Okay.
And we have a great relationship, and I'm so proud of her. Like, she's actually, gone up to this man, given her a piece of her mind,
Mm.
and has let him know that, hey, you will never hurt me again. Like,
Mm.
I'm forgiving you for me, not for you.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that's something that every person has to go through as well, is forgiveness. I truly believe that I don't think I'd ever be at this point without counseling in my younger years and without understanding that I have to forgive to move on. It doesn't mean that I'm forgiving that man. It just ultimately means that I'm forgiving myself for feeling the way I did for so many years. I'm not gonna let
Mm.
that affect me anymore.
Yeah.
But again, that's a little bit of play in my head because it's obviously still affecting me.
Yeah.
So it's
It's
yeah,
complicated. It's
it is.
complicated. Yeah. There's issues there around, I've like in small community, like the generational impact of, colonization, particularly through the residential and Indian day schools that also did impact Métis and Inuit children and families. Um, these sexual abuse, or some might call it incest, within the families, is still not being really talked about.
Mhm.
And uh, as a consequence, our families remain fractured, and people are keeping secrets because the abuser was likely abused,
Mhm.
and the abuser generally might be like a well respected person in the community. Like they
Mhm.
live this Jekyll and Hyde kind of existence which doesn't justify it at all. And
Right.
so the people who don't want to ostracize your uncle, um, are he's occurring for them in the space of the fun guy he probably is, like
Mhm.
I don't know your uncle, but like maybe you think you get what I'm saying. So
Oh
then
yeah.
they have
Mhm.
a hard time, like, and then he has probably children, the abuser has children, the abuser has a wife or a husband, like, because women abuse as well,
Right.
sexually commit sexual abuse. They have families and they have children, and if I were to say what happened to me as a victim, then I would be fracturing that family. And it's just layered, so layered. And we're
Mhm.
living in that in all our communities. I don't think there's one Indigenous community in Canada that is not still living with the fallout that has happened from the schools in terms of
Yeah,
the
I
abuse.
truly believe that as well, and I think that's why conversations like this is so important because it will give someone, hopefully, spark the seed that they need to talk about it, whether it's getting it down on paper and talking about it with themselves, or going and
Mhm.
talking about it with, a counselor or a close friend or a family member, or, whatever stage that is. But definitely talking about it um, beats alcohol because we all
Yeah, yeah,
we
yeah,
all know
yeah,
that a lot of people turn to alcohol and drugs for that, right?
yeah,
Which is sad, but it's also an escape. And so there's
yeah.
no blame in that. There's no blame at all because everybody, even me, I want to escape that past, and I want to escape those memories, and I can't. But talking about it does help. And so, and 15 years ago, I wouldn't be able to have this conversation. There's no way. But I've talked about it so much, that even to the depth where, okay, now I need to understand what they went through, what the abuser went through, or even, what my dad went through, because not knowing my dad, I grew up not really knowing my dad. I remember maybe 3 happy times in my childhood seeing him, and each one of those times came with a gift. But I have so many memories of him being an asshole, being drunk, being violent, being physical with my mom, being, just so many abusive memories that I just, I really had to come to grips with that as well. And so the question then came, okay, why are they this way? What happened in their life and what hasn't happened to get them through? Because you never get over, you just get through, right?
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's a perception that a lot of people, or misperception that a lot of people have, is like, oh, you'll get through it, you'll get over it. Well, no, you get over, under, around, and through any obstacle in your way, but it's still going to be in your mind fresh, until you allow that space out of your head. But it's still going to be there. It may not be fresh, but it's still there. And, then, when I moved to British Columbia when I was younger, and I got to know my dad, and the abuse and the stories that he went through with, residential school, and being incarcerated, and why he always stayed on the road, why he was a truck driver. He felt he was safe. He was safer on the road to be a truck driver than he was. Every time he'd stop trucking, he would beat the shit out of my mom. I just swore, sorry. He would beat my mom up.
On this
Yeah. So he would, every time he came home, he would beat my mom up, or he would, steal or do, I'm pretty sure he did a bank robbery at one point. He's been in the Prince Albert Penitentiary. He was there during the riot, back in the 80s. And so he always felt that he was safer on the road, which is why he made a career on the road. But, growing up, you don't get that. You don't understand that. But it really took some brave conversations with him to even understand that, and all the abuse that he went through, and then where his mindset is. And, a little bit of breakthrough with my dad. He is, I want to say 69. He just turned 68 or 69 this year.
Yeah.
And he actually attended his first counseling session yesterday.
Yay.
Yeah. So, I mean,
it's
amazing, it's amazing to see where that comes from. But, even having those conversations with him and understanding why he is the way he is, it's hard. And sometimes I have to look at him and be like, Dad, I can't hear anymore. It's so horrific, some stories, that it's unfair to even assume that I would fathom the gravity of that unless you actually lived that reality,
Yeah.
And I think that that's what a lot of people struggle with as well, especially in, the new generations coming up, is if you don't actually live that experience, it's hard for you to grasp that. It's kind of like my mom saying, oh, you'll never know what it was like walking uphill both ways to school in 10 feet of snow. And it's like, no, you're right. I will never know that. And it's actually unfair of you to even say that to me, because there's no way I'll ever know that. Right.
Yeah.
So it's like a preemptive assumption that,
That's so interesting. I just want to interject for a second, because that's a very important point you're making about you'll never know unless you do it yourself. And then even at that level, it's your own experience as well. It's not mine, and so, but that's some of the reason why Brian and I just made a deliberate decision to raise our children in the bush here on the river every summer, and forced them to forced is kind of a strong word, but I can be pretty stern, haul pails of water up the hill. Because how do you give your children the experience, a reference point, so that they can be grateful for the running water that comes out of the tap well, in cities anyway, I mean, there's no, yeah, the potable running water that comes out of some Canadian taps.
Mhm. Mhm.
um, but how do you give your kids that experience without recreating some of the struggle without it being traumatic?
Yeah.
And so that's really the thing. I don't know. I'm sorry, I digressed from what you were saying, but that really made me think about that, because in as the amenities in life continue to improve and make everything easier and easier,
Mhm.
there's something being lost. There's something being lost in
Right.
people.
I
That
truly believe that. It's interesting when my kids were younger, I thought the same thing. Like I used to say that all the time to my kids. Oh, you'll never know what it's like having a mom with 7 siblings walking across Saskatoon on grocery day carrying 8 bags of groceries for 13 city blocks. You'll never know. And then I don't even know who told me that. It was probably somewhere in my counseling or my podcasts or I do a lot of self-help motivational books and stuff like that. And so it really hit me that you'll never know. And so I
Mhm.
really thought, okay, well, this is unfair of me to even be saying to my kids, because if I'm feeling it's unfair that my mom said it to me, but now I'm actually living that and saying it to my kids.
Yeah.
And then, the other side of that is, yeah, you're right. How do you give your kids a better life and a better instilling those roots that one actually needs to be more grounded and be more connected, especially in the social world, right?
Mhm.
Um, the word social is not what it was
No.
years ago. I mean, there's, social media, social platforms, social gatherings on media platforms. So it's just, you know,
Yeah.
it's crazy. But yeah, I mean, when I married my husband, we were in Ontario, but then we moved back to Lower Mainland, BC. And I never felt like I was home. I never ever felt like I was going to settle, like I was grounded.
Hmm.
And maybe that's because growing up, how I did when I moved to Ontario, I think there was a year where we moved 5 times. Like,
Mhm.
so we were never ever grounded. We were in Saskatchewan, but then when we moved to Ontario, we were all over the place. And I don't think my mom had a plan. She just was like, okay, I have new family and new beginnings,
Survival.
and
Survival.
I'm moving away from the negativity. Um, but that brought its own set of problems. And so moving to BC, there was a couple eye-opening moments where I knew I had to change the way of life. One
Mhm.
of them was when my daughter, she's 21 now, but she was 6 or 7 at the time. And we were sitting down to eat dinner. And one of the family traditions, as you would say, in my family was we would always have the evening news on, the 5 or 6 o'clock news. And we would always be watching the news, not so much watching, but listening.
The background, yeah.
Well, yeah, while we're having dinner. And my daughter just started like bawling, like flat out tears. And I looked at her and I'm like, sweetie, what's wrong? And she's like, I don't understand why we put this on. It just makes me cry. It's all
Oh,
negative. There's never any happy stories. And if there is, it's always at the end. And from that day, we
yeah.
have not watched the news. I don't watch
Drinks.
the
Yeah,
news
yeah, yeah.
because coming from a 6-year-old, that's super impactful. And it's so right. Like it's
Yeah,
nothing but negativity. So if you don't surround yourself with that, like if it's not positive, what is it? It's negative, right? And if you have to think about it, chances are it's negative.
yeah.
And so, yeah, just making simple changes like that. And then, as they got older, 10, 11, 12, we lived in Penticton. And I thought I was taking a look at, just my nieces and nephews at that age and how they're growing up in a city, and the social media advances and the peer pressures that I never had going through school. And so I can't relate to that because I never went through that.
Mhm.
And so that was another big fear. And so I was like, no, I'm taking my kids and I'm moving north. And I moved north. And so I moved to Fort St. James, lived there for 5 years. But then everything in the town kind of shut down. So there was nothing really for kids anymore.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I just kept traveling and I came across Atlin. And I'll tell you, when I drove into Atlin, I knew I was home. I knew I
Yeah.
was home. It's been a bit of a struggle with the kids adapting over the years, especially in Atlan where we get our water trucked in.
Yeah,
So if we don't catch that yellow light on a Friday, we're going without water until the
yeah,
Monday, right?
yeah, yeah,
But they have learned to adapt, and that's really important to give kids those skills to be adaptable,
yeah,
and to again feel the fear and do it anyway, go over, around, under, and through, just as long as you're coming out on the other side,
mhm,
so
yeah. Huh. I'm still sort of thinking about the original question around identity, which was why you contacted me.
mhm,
And let's circle back to that again. So I'm thinking about it as well. In my own situation, I grew up oldest daughter of a storekeeper, and my grandfather was a fur trader. And
mhm,
so he would move the store around Manitoba, and then it settled in Barons River. And I grew up, and our identity was primarily around the store and what our parents did for a living. And I
mhm,
didn't really have any sense. I mean, in Barons River, when I was a child, a young girl, on the north side of the river, all of the treaty people lived. And on the south side of the river, all the Métis people lived. And then
mhm,
after Bill C-35 corrected some of the racism within the Indian Act, pretty much everybody on the south side of the river qualified to be registered as Indian and did so. I
mhm,
didn't do it right away. Like I'd actually So the bill made the changes in 85, and I didn't apply for registered Indian status even though I qualified right away until 91, until after I'd met Brian. And
mhm,
because I realized that if I didn't get registered as an Indian, and I had children with him, then the descent rights of my child would be impacted by my non-registration. So that's a lot of gobbledygook. If people aren't familiar with the Indian Act, they won't have a clue what the hell I was talking about.
right,
So,
right,
so my point is though that our who we are is actually a combination, I think, of being sourced in literally our roots, our heritage, and tracing that, and
mhm,
also who we claim to be and who we know we are. And one of the things that bothers me and a lot of other Indigenous people is um, registered Indians, for lack of a better word, that's so disgusting, but, Indigenous peoples, I suppose I could say, um, or Métis people who self identify. And of course, I love that you're so emotionally grown up. So I'm not talking about you when I'm saying this. I want to talk about you with this, talk
mhm,
about this with you,
mhm,
uh, because we're going through a phase of pretendians, is the thing
yes,
right now in Indian country. And then exposing that. And then the other piece is there's a plane taking off, eh? Behind
there
you?
is. My
Yeah.
kitchen window's wide open,
That's
sorry.
okay, that's okay. There must be a float plane taking off on Atlan Lake. That's so cool. I
Yeah,
love that. I grew up with the sound of float planes. Anyway, so we have people who are claiming they are who they are
mhm,
without the context of community or being connected, and some of that is completely legitimate, like with the 60 scoop, with the fracturing of our families from like what you've described in your own family. you know Hello, of course people are disconnected from their past and who they are. So how does this all work? Like in First Nation governments, we often get um, it's surprising to white people that I know that people would pretend to be Indigenous. And I
mhm,
was like, people will do anything to get a job sometimes. They got kids to feed, whatever, eh? And so,
right,
um, and then there's the other piece, which community, as we've been sharing in the context of family, community creates the culture that we know. And
right,
so, without an Indigenous community, like you have memories of your childhood and the culture of your collective community that was expressed through, your cookum and the moccasins she made and the sewing you saw and the fiddling. And, it was really clear in listening to you. how you grew up in the context of a community. And then if that's not passed on to our children, and then they self-identify, and or belong to a community,
Mhm.
what about that then? Like,
Yeah, it's interesting that you would say that because, and that's where my offense sprung from when you had stated, "Are you Indigenous or do you self identify?" My offense was, "Well, what do you mean I'm not Indigenous?" Right? And that was a question I really had to ask myself, and I'm still asking myself. But I do I shouldn't say I do. I am doing the work to identify, not just
mm,
self identify. And
mm.
so I have reached out to some archives. I've gotten a little bit more information
Oh,
back. I do know, like I said, from Crescent Lake settlement, Metis settlement, and a little bit more backgrounds. And I've got news clipping articles and whatnot. I've contacted the Métis British Columbia nation. And so looking to hear back from there. I do have a little bit of work to do to uncover my dad, as he has never been registered. So we got to register him before I can register me, but that paperwork is already in the process. And then, of course, it's going down the line and adding my siblings and whatnot and giving them the information. Now, whether they do or not, I
mhm.
doubt it. I can see maybe one of my siblings going down that road, but the other seven probably absolutely not. But for me, I think it's just I have something missing, and
Mm,
this is the piece that's missing. And especially in the last year being here in Atlin, where the culture is so rich and so beautiful and so um, just really heart opening, not just eye opening, but
yeah,
heart
yeah,
opening,
heart
you
opening.
know? And so it just makes you even more want to belong. Everybody wants to belong, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, as I dive into that, I'll definitely be learning and growing, not just personally and culturally, but passing on to my kids as I learn.
Yeah,
And so that's going to be
yeah.
interesting. I have my mom's buckskin jacket from the 70s with her Métis beading on the back, and I can't wait to bust it out and redo the beading because it's coming off. But those
Nice.
are pieces that my kids have never seen. And
Wow.
so that's going to be great to really dive in. And I know I am expecting some tough days.
Yeah.
And again, growth doesn't come from comfort. And so I think just keeping that in mind, that as I discover who I am, and maybe next year I can come back on and say, I am an Indigenous woman. I identify, but I am. And so that's what's keeping me from pushing forward.
Mhm,
That's what keeps me, sorry, pushing
mhm.
forward. But yeah, I mean, I recognize that there's going to be some moments where it's going to be a couple steps back,
Yeah,
and that's okay because
you're
everything takes
so
time.
you're so brave and so beautiful, Andrea. I'm just so
Thank
touched,
you.
heart opening. This has been a heart opening conversation, and I can relate. Like I was beginning to share, like my own journey. As the daughter of a storekeeper. Obviously, I'm Indigenous. I have Indigenous blood and all of that, and I have a status number. I'm a registered Indian and all that. But that sense of belonging and you know not growing up, like where I'm from, there's barely any culture. Like we're very, very, very much a Christian community, and I'm not saying that in a bad
Mhm.
way. Every human being makes their own choices, and
Right.
so in my community, it's a primarily Christian community still today. And in fact, in many of the northern communities in Canada, it, they remain Christian communities because that's what it is, and that's a whole other bunch of podcasts
Mhm.
about that. But so younger people are in the process, like, of reclaiming, like where I'm from in Barons River. They've just started, like, the whole ribbon skirt movement is impacting um our communities in so many positive ways. Like There's young women in Barons River who are learning to sew ribbon skirts and identify as who they are, obviously through a ribbon skirt. And then, of course, there's some people saying that's not our culture. That's not our way. We never did that. We never did that. That's not our way. And, my response to that is, everything was new one time.
Mhm.
Well, the first time somebody did something, it wasn't our way. And then they did it. And then as more people did it, it becomes our way. And
Mhm.
so that whole thing that you're going through at an individual level, entire communities are going through that, where
Mhm.
we're searching and recreating and regenerating our collective and individual identities. And it's a powerful experience,
Right.
and I, my that where I get my shit in a knot is when people who have some cultural knowledge come into that experience and act like a nun, or a priest, like as if they've got all the only true source, like they only know how many ribbons should be on. Whatever, get the hell away from me. You
Yeah.
know, that's
Yeah.
not, I'm just not up for that at all. I'm up for legitimate kind passing on. I can't think of the fancy words, like of ceremony. And if I'm ever honored enough, like it's an honor to be invited into a ceremony with somebody you can tell is ceremonial, because none of that rule oriented shit happens there. What
Right.
happens there is very spiritual. And and I'm digressing completely here. I just got up. I have my feather
Love it. Love it.
completely. But I didn't want you to leave thinking that you're alone or that you're the only one
Mhm.
on this journey. The
Mhm.
journey you're on is the journey we are all on.
Mhm.
In my own life, leaving there and then getting to law school, it was really my identity was really impacted in law school, because I experienced whatever. That's a whole podcast too. But I remember calling, one of my childhood friends, and because I was looking for Anishinaabe law, like our own law in the language, and I'm not fluent. Like I can speak, like deskate, like are you hungry? Are you cold? Where are you coming from? Like just this like kindergarten conversation, and I understand maybe high school, but I'm not. I can't speak philosophy in my own language, and so I called one of my childhood friends and said, I'm trying to figure out how to say this, white word in our language. She said, "Heh, you never cared about speaking the language when we were kids." She said, "Why the hell do you care now?" She
Ah.
said, "You didn't care about being an Indian back then, you know?" And it was very confronting.
Mhm.
And she said, "What are you, born again?" And I was like, "Yeah, I actually am a born again Indian,
Mhm.
you know, and I'm reclaiming that. And that's my choice. And
Mhm.
that's my right, because I can trace my heritage, you know? And
Right.
so I would just encourage you to continue to trace your blood so
Mhm.
that you can identify where you're from. And,
Exactly.
and your connection with that, where you're from, is a whole other issue.
Mhm.
That's your journey. That's nobody else's business. But I think it's really important in this age of pretendians, that we be able to do that, so that
Right.
we show respect, especially if we're in positions of service with
Mhm.
Indigenous peoples, if we're employed with Indigenous governments, that we be able to do that in a good way and in an open way
Mhm.
and in an accountable way. It's about accountability,
Right. It totally is. And
eh?
one of the toughest things is holding yourself accountable.
Ah, oh,
It's discipline, and it's grasping, what you want, and just holding on until you got it, and there's no letting go until it's actually a part of you, right?
mm,
And so, yeah, this is it's this last month has really been an eye opener to me. It was a lot of back and forth, and now, with that first conversation that we had of self identifying is, like I said, been heart opening, and it's been a journey that I'm scared to go through, but also excited and disciplined to see it through,
mhm.
which
Yeah.
is awesome.
And you're giving me new thoughts. Like the whole thing, I was just thinking about in a collective paradigm, my understanding is that uh, belonging is ascribed, it's put on you
Mm-hmm.
rather than subscribed. And in an individual paradigm, you subscribe, you claim, you know? So the process of self identifying kind of leans more towards the dominant individualistic culture of self identifying. I claim my rights, my individual rights. And
Right.
so we're failing again as as collective nations to develop, or we need to. Failing is such a strong, judgy word, but we need to develop these processes where we can help our people who are out there saying, "I think I belong to you." Like,
Mm-hmm.
my people, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So then, what's the process? We have to ascribe. We have to put it on people when they come back to us instead of pushing them away and saying, "Well, she just acting like a white lady. She doesn't even belong here. What the hell?" Like all that meanness that happens, you know.
Yeah.
And that happening where we say, "Oh my God, I'm so happy to see you. Oh yeah, here's your family, and here's what you do, and here's the what you wear, and here's how you eat, and here's how you dance." Or that process of ascribing needs to be formally developed as a part of our First Nation and Métis governments, so
Mm-hmm.
that we don't further traumatize people. Like we
Mm-hmm.
got the whole 60 scoop, a whole bunch of people there that
Mm-hmm.
they're the first one. Did you I don't know if you've watched that Little Bird? Did you
No.
watch? Oh, you should. Oh my God, I just had such a hard time not crying. Oh, I'm so glad I've done so much therapy. I was able to like distance myself so I didn't spend the whole
Mm-hmm.
series traumatized. But it does share one version of the 60 scoop what happened. But people coming back after something that was out of their control, like that you were sexually abused as a child and it led you to disconnect from your community. I don't see that as your fault at all. Why the
Mm-hmm.
fuck would I? That
Mm-hmm.
would be just stupid and mean, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Well,
Instead,
and we have to understand, sorry, but we
yeah,
have to understand that people's words do impact us. And until we have the right, I'm going to call it mental training, because that's
mm,
what it really is mental training to train yourself to not make other words affect you so deeply.
mhm,
Um, but it does happen. People's words affect, like I grew up, oh, well, you're not Métis. I mean, you don't look Indian at all.
yeah.
And then some people will say, well, no, she's got the high cheekbones. You
Yes.
know? So it's like, a back and forth and a play on people's words. But I think, you know, even if I go forward, well, as I shouldn't say even if, I said as I am going forward, I
Mhm,
know that I'm failing towards success. I'm
mhm,
falling towards success.
mhm,
It's going to be a successful outcome no matter what my heritage is, because I'm
mhm.
winning just knowing where I come from and who I am.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So yeah,
Yeah.
and then my words might change as
Yes,
to how I identify, right?
they will, because we're evolving, we're ever evolving, and
Mhm.
growing and learning. Yeah, so yeah, whoa, this has been pretty good.
It's been great. It's been great.
Yeah. And so we're almost out of time. I like to start on time, end on time. It's a thing I got from a 12-step experience that I still have all the time. I love starting on time and ending on time. And so
Absolutely.
it's
Yeah.
the one place of I can control some of the chaos in my life. So
Totally.
I'd like to offer you a couple of minutes to share some last parting words this time, and we'll talk some more. Like we'll come back again, maybe in 6 months and check on you. Where are you at in your journey?
Yeah.
Exciting.
Yeah, I'm excited, but I'm fearful at the same time. I know that it's not going to be an overnight journey. But I do know that with consistency and just staying on it, um, and again, feeling the fear and doing it anyway,
Mhm.
eventually I will have an outcome and I will be able to um, know where I belong, and finally find that missing puzzle piece. And, when I find that puzzle piece, it's not going to be exactly what I have in my head, you
Yes.
know? And I think that's what's kind of scaring me as well. Because, you have this mold. Everybody has a mold of what you think it's going to be, right?
Mm.
But just understanding that, that I know that it'll be work
Mm.
to unfold and it's going to be beautiful.
Yeah.
It's going to be ugly and beautiful.
Yes.
Um, but that's what life is. It's
Yes.
the ugly with the beautiful.
Yeah.
So I'm excited, and thank you, Joan, for having this platform where people can come on and just express themselves without fear and without judgment, and it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing.
Oh, beautiful. Okay, thank you. I've really enjoyed getting to know you, and I do see you as brave and beautiful and powerful and free, and it's good you were here. It's really good. You've given me lots to think about as well, and this is great. So I love laughing. Most Indigenous people love laughing. We laugh at ourselves. We white people think we're making fun of each other, which I guess we kind of are, but uh, uh, there's a line, there's a line that people cross sometimes when they're, they become bullies or whatever with the humor. But the line is in a way different place in our culture than it is in other cultures. And so even amongst Indigenous people, like when I moved to Atlan with my husband, and I'll just speak about him then, where his haha line is, it's like so not even hardly there. Like I was like, I think that's because you guys were just smacked up on the mountains while you got no haha, like, the ability, like, whereas on the prairies, like Manitoba, like, oh my God, nothing is sacred. Everybody laughs about everything. And I think it's one of the ways we survive. So I
Mhm.
thought to myself, here I am doing this podcast, and I think I'm all that and whatever. And really, I'm an earring addict. so so I thought, well, I'm going to feature an earring, and I've featured these already, but
Love
these are
it.
made by a Métis woman, and her name's Barb Fayant, and you can find her on Facebook, and she's in Whitehorse actually. And her earrings and beading, her creations are all done with semi-precious stones, healing stones from that whole thing. And then this is fox fur, Arctic, some kind of Arctic fox fur. But
Mhm.
she's so talented. I just love them. Yeah.
They are beautiful. They
I
are.
know, eh? She's
Yeah.
so talented and so humble. Like I said to her, Barb, your prices are not high enough, girl. Like, geez. And
Mhm.
so you can find her in Whitehorse, and she's on Facebook, Barb Fayant.
Nice.
So my closing thoughts for today. Yeah, I haven't talked about it much, but I feel really strongly that I don't know what the word is, but the only word coming is repatriation. You know,
Mhm.
the repatriation of our people
Mhm.
should be a number one priority,
Mhm.
because when they come home and no one extends a helping hand, no one wraps them in the safety when they come home so fragile and hurt and lost. And then their own people are like, no, that's not how you do it. That's not how you say it. You know, that whole stuff that comes from colonization, that meanness and rule oriented meanness that comes from cultures not ours, is what many of our people face when they come home.
Right.
And that's like super, super sad, super
Mhm.
sad. And so that's my takeaway from our meeting, is that, the primary takeaway is that it's really incumbent upon leadership to look at how are we welcoming our own relatives home,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
You know,
Well, and leadership is developing other leaders within you. That's what
absolutely,
leadership is. So
absolutely.
this has been great.
Okay, I'm just going to hit the end button, then you and I can say goodbye offline. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and please share. If you're listening to this as a replay, please share it. You can find all the past episodes at my YouTube channel under the live button. They're all there. All my guests. I think we're at around a dozen now, because I have not made the time to create a playlist and upload them all, but I will eventually. All right. See you next week. Oh, next week we have Shelly Denny on, and she's an Anishinaabe, and
Mhm.
she's rides a Harley. She's a boss babe, and she's going to be joining me from Sturgis, because she's down at Sturgis, and we're going to talk about, I'm not sure, but we're going to talk about riding motorcycle for sure.
Sweet.
Okay.